Chapter 2. Back to Tegel. Towards the end of April 1859, the citizens of Berlin began to miss His Excellency, the Baron von Humboldt. They met him no longer in the street in the afternoon, walking towards the palace. Neither did they see him at twilight in his favorite haunt, Unter den Linden. "Where is His Excellency?" they asked, but none could answer. In a few days the question was changed to, "How is His Excellency?" For they had learned in the meantime that he was ill. The postboy still made his morning calls at the famous little house in the Oranienburger Strasse, and from time to time through the day, carriages stopped nearby and stately gentlemen, decorated with orders, alighted and rang the bell softly. On the morning of the 3rd of May, the journals of Berlin announced his illness. Alexander von Humboldt had been confined to his bed for the last 12 days. His strength has been gradually failing, his mind retains all its clearness. Through his powers of expression has decreased in the dangerous condition of the revered patient. The greatest care and precaution against all excitement is necessary. Then followed the bulletin of his health, May 2nd. The fever has somewhat abated since last evening. The catarrh is also less violent. The condition of the patient is very weak, is still very doubtful. The bulletins were continued from day to day. May 3rd. Very great loss of strength, his condition in a high degree of doubtful. May 4th. The condition of Humboldt during the night of Monday-Tuesday was exceedingly critical. Through the violent fits of coughing and difficulty of breathing, towards noon of Tuesday, the patient was much improved in various respects, but the continued loss of strength renders his position to a high degree critical. May 5th. Humboldt's condition since yesterday almost unchanged, weakness increasing. May 6th. Friday morning. The strength of the patient is decreasing from hour to hour. The last hours of the dying man were soothed by the presence of his relatives, who flocked to his residence as soon as they heard of his illness. First came from Tegel the Baroness von Below, once his merry little niece Gabrielle, but now a placid widow of 57. Then the husband of his niece, Aldehyde, General von Heidemann. And then from Ademachen, his nephew Hermann, and his grandnephew William, the son of the amiable Theodore, of whom Frau Caroline wrote more than 60 years before. Shall we describe the chamber of the dying man? The darkened walls touched with the sunlight that creeps through the half-closed blinds, the group of sorrowing friends around his bed, his reverend white hair, his divine blue eyes, the smile on his kind old face. No, the death of the humblest man is too sacred. A thing to make a picture of, how much more sacred than the death of Humboldt, the greatest and best of men. He died on the 6th of May at 2:30 in the afternoon. A few moments before his death, the blinds were opened, and the full blaze of the sun poured on into the chamber. "How grand those rays," he murmured. "They seem to beckon earth to heaven." He closed his eyes like a wearied child, and slept a long, long sleep. The 10th of May was set apart for the funeral. Early in the morning, the citizens of Berlin were seen hurrying in the direction of Friedrichstrasse and Unter den Linden, through which the procession was to pass. The houses in Oranienburger Strasse were hung with the crepe and decorated with black flags. Humboldt's house was closed. The police kept the street clear, admitting into it only those who were to take part in the ceremonies. They soon made their appearance, ministers of state, generals of the army, and grave and learned professors. There was Dove, rector magnificus of the university, Enke, the celebrated astronomer, Professor Ischerlich, Karl Ritter, the great geographer, and a host of authors and artists. Before starting, they entered the house to take a last look at the illustrious dead. He lay in a large oaken coffin and is sturdy, surrounded by his books. Over him hung his portrait, wreathed with palm leaves and exotic flowers. At 8 o'clock, the coffin was borne down the stairs and placed in the funeral car. The crowd uncovered their heads as the coffin appeared. Presently, the procession started. It was headed by Seyfert and the servants of the family. Then came the students of the Frederick William University, 600 in all, led by marshals bearing black rods. Then a band of musicians playing solemn music, and followed by 8 clergymen in official robes. Next came the 3 court chamberlains, the Count of Fürstenberg, Stamheim, Count von Donhoff, and Baron von Schlecklitz, and a 4th appointed for the occasion. They bore on red velvet cushions the insignia of the Order of the Black Eagle, the medal of the Grand Chancellor of the Peace class of the Order of Merit, and the countless medals and orders which the sovereigns of Europe had showed upon Humboldt. They came, though, the hearse covered with black and drawn by 6 black horses from the royal stables. The horses were led by royal grooms, who were attended by 5 court footmen and a Jaeger. Behind the hearse were 20 deputies of the Students' Society, each with a palm branch in his hand. Upon the coffin, which was decorated with palm leaves, were 2 crowns, one of laurel and the other of white azalea branches. The male relatives of the dead followed: General von Heldemann, Hermann von Humboldt, and William Humboldt Descheraden, together with a number of Knights of the Order of the Black Eagle, headed by the chief of the order, General von Wrangel, and the generals of the infantry and cavalry, Prince Radziwiłł and Count von der Gruben. Then came to the ministers of state in their brilliant uniforms, officers of the court, privy councillors, and the members of the diplomatic corps. Among the latter was the American minister, Governor Wright, and all the Americans in Berlin. Then a deputation from both houses of the legislature, the members of the Academy of Sciences, the professors of the university, headed by the rector magnificus, the members of the Academy of Arts, and some of the most distinguished actors of the Royal Theatre. Then the magistrates and officials of the city, each wearing a gold chain and a medal over his coat. Then the citizens of Berlin, old and young, rich and poor, with a great number of strangers, many of whom had come from long distance to show their respect to the dead. The rear was formed by the line of empty carriages, half a mile in length, headed by the state carriage of the king and queen, drawn by 8 horses, the carriage of the Prince Regent, and those of the princes and diplomatic corps. Solemn and slow to the sound of mournful music, the procession wended its way to the Dom Church. As it passed through Friedrich Strauss, the pupils of the Frederick Gymnasium sang a hymn. The windows were draped with black and thronged with respectful faces. The crowds in the street stood uncovered and silent. Not a sound was heard, save the rain-like patter of feet and the yearning soul of the music. As soon as Unter den Linden was passed, the church bells began to toll, and the Choral Society of Berlin broke into a hymn. The Prince Regent and the Princes of Prussia, standing with their heads bared like the meanest of the subjects, received the coffin at the portico of the Dom Church. It was borne into the church, followed by the court preacher and several ministers, and placed on a bier before the altar, which was decorated with palms and flowers. The chamberlains deposited their cushions laden with orders on the other side, and stood at the head of the coffin. The royal personages and the relatives of Humboldt stepped within the altar railing, and the organ began to pedal. The congregation sang, "Jesus my trust, blessed are the dead," said the priest, "who die in the Lord." "Yea, saith the Spirit," the choir answered, "for they rest from their labors. Hallelujah." A prayer was then made, a funeral sermon was preached, and the Lord's Prayer was said. Then the good old chorus, "Be comforted and most happy," and "Christ is my life," were sung, and the ceremony was over. The procession departed as it came, with the pattering of feet and melancholy music. The church was soon deserted of the living, but the dead remained, in the oaken coffin, under the solemn dome, alone with God. That night, the body was moved to Tegel.